Welcome back to Speaking Truth to Goodness, where we hold space for the stories and visions of those leading the charge for a better world, starting with Portland. We are your hosts, Patty Robron and Jerry Atkin, alongside our remarkable guest host for this season, Andra Voltavine. Today, we're thrilled to introduce Jennifer Park, a candidate in District 2, whose extensive background in public service and activism is shaping her approach to transformative change within Portland's city government. Jennifer's career has been dedicated to supporting our community's most vulnerable, from managing supportive housing for formerly homeless adults to enhancing educational outcomes for students with learning challenges. Now, she's turning her focus toward local government, driven by a desire to tackle the root causes of systemic injustices rather than just their symptoms. Today, Jennifer will share her journey from the nonprofit sector to the political arena, discussing the balance between working within the system and the need for foundational changes. Join us. We'll learn how Jennifer's experiences have shaped her views on government structures, what her strategies for building community resilience look like, and the personal practices she employs to avoid burnout. Join us as we explore the intersections of governance, community advocacy, and personal sustainability with Jennifer Park. Here's our conversation. So here we are. We did it. We made it to episode 5 of this season where we're introducing all these amazing candidates.
Yeah.
So Jennifer.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I just love being able to actually have these conversations. They're the best part of this whole adventure.
Is there anything super top of mind for you?
Sure, yeah. I mean, really, I can start by talking about the journey that brought me to this choice, which some days people say, what made you decide to run for council? And my answer is, really deep and resounding, which is what I will share. And some days it's like, I don't know, guys. It's been a rough day, right? No, but really, my path to sort of community service started my first real career job out of college. I worked at a law firm that did maritime defense. So basically, if there was a big shipping company that was being sued by the family member of a former seaman who had mesothelioma, or the ship had an oil spill, my organization went and defended those companies. And it was really challenging morally place to be. Mm-hmm. And one day an attorney was walking through the halls and made a joke to another attorney, "Isn't it great when the defendant is dead?" And I was like, the whole course of my life changed that day.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, I can't be here. I cannot do this. And as quickly as I could, I wound up finding the position with a nonprofit that did supportive housing, and have been committed to working for organizations that serve the community ever since. It was like, I was so thrilled to have a really, solid job out of college. And I was just like, I am losing my soul every day. Mm-hmm. So I was 6 years with the nonprofit. They housed, at the time, 450 formerly homeless adults. They've expanded since then. That was back in San Francisco. And I only left that organization when it was time for my family to move to Portland. And it was really, we were looking for a way to really balance our life and have, not be super burdened by the cost of housing and the cost of childcare and just barely making ends meet. And so we explored different places to go and immediately fell in love with Portland.
Where'd you come from?
Originally from San Francisco.
Okay.
I was born and raised. And I went to UC Santa Cruz. That's where I met my now spouse. And after college, we actually lived in London for 6 months and then moved back to San Francisco. And I lived there until I moved here. And I don't look back. at all. I absolutely love Portland. And then in my time here, I've worked a couple of years in the office at a public elementary school, and then I was able to transition to the nonprofit that I've been with now almost 5 years, that really married my nonprofit skill base and experience with that passion for supporting education. And we partner with schools all over the metro area and expanding further and further into other parts of Oregon and Vancouver, supporting educators who help kids with learning challenges. And sometimes that's specific diagnoses like ADHD or dyslexia or other high needs. And sometimes it's just kids who like are struggling because of trauma and all the different things that come from, being a small human who's figuring out what it's like to be a complex being in this world. It's rough. Really a few years ago, I think my husband and I were, disgruntled about something going on in local politics, and I wish I could remember what it was specifically, but he made the joke like, all right, where are we going next? And I was like, no, we're going to do it. We're going to get in there and make the change. And I really just hit a place where I felt like this work is super important to me, and I feel like I'm just putting Band-Aids on problems that go so much deeper. And I really want to get inside and make systemic changes that help heal the cause of all of these challenges, right? Like help break down these historic systems that don't serve our community. I'm in the process of getting my executive master's in public administration. That was sort of part of my journey of saying, how can I be the best person to do this work and support my community? So that's what brings me here today.
Wow. It's really incredible. Thank you for all of your activism and all of your work in the community. It's really heartening to see how many community leaders are just really stepping up in this big transition moment where there's so much change, and I think that's exactly what we need for sure.
Yeah, and it's really, I'm during this whole process of campaigning, I'm really seeing part of what I'm so excited about is the giant change that we're seeing in our local government structure. And I'm excited to get in there from the start and say, all right, let's lay a foundation of that really has us governed based on our values. And I see that with you as well, Andra. And so but it's interesting, like actually campaigning, how much it feels like there's also a collection of folks who are trying to hold tightly onto sort of old government power structures. That's a little bit scary. I mean, it really feels like our historical values as a community that it makes Portland so beautiful are really on the November ballot. Are we going to stay an innovative, creative, people-centered, progressive community, or are we going to build a new government based on sort of historical power dynamics and money making our decisions?
It's been really interesting to watch because I just read the book Breaking Together, and I think the subtitle is basically talking about collapse acceptance and all of the different structures that are crumbling in our late stage empire moment right now. And one of the things that it talks at length about is how when people are scared and uncertain and things are wild with like climate uncertainty and all of that, there's this tendency toward wanting more authoritative structures of government, which is really the wrong direction. Like, instead, we need to be teaching people how to regain their sense of participation and agency that our education system and our government systems at large have sort of stripped from us. And so, it's really interesting to see how that played out, for instance, in the recent primary in Oregon and Portland, and the way that like the law and order district attorney candidate got in above, a more progressive district attorney. And that's in a city like Portland that considers itself extremely progressive. So I think that you're absolutely right that there is a fear and definitely a pivotal moment this year for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it was also interesting to hear you talk about, the law system and our justice system and how that was really a pivotal moment for you, because I was working in class action lawsuit documentation for a while, and I thought, this is good work. This is the way, because we're helping the people get money. But what I really realized was that at the end of the day, it's mostly a way for the attorneys to make 30% of the settlement fees, and then everyone else gets 2 cents for receiving a text message they didn't sign up for, and it's just like all very farcical to me. I think the nail on the head with that job for me was one of my coworkers forwarded me one of our cases that was for Jewish accounts that had gotten frozen during the Holocaust so that they couldn't leave the country. And that bank is still in business today. Wow. And I found that out, and the descendants of those people whose bank accounts were frozen got $2,000 a piece. And I was like, how do you put a value on a life like that? And why is this bank still in business? And it is cheaper for banks to have to go through these class action lawsuits than it is for them to do business ethically.
I just recently, a close family member of mine had a medical procedure that went awry and was exploring what are the options to sort of go at this from a malpractice perspective. And what we very, very quickly learned is you can personally put in all of this time and money and energy to fight that process. And if you win, the first people who get paid out is the insurance company that paid for your procedure. And if there's anything left over, you might get some. So yeah, the whole system is broken. Even in affordable housing, even in housing that is designed and funded by government jurisdictions and for community programs, it is still so much capitalist decision-making going into that. So we right now, if you are building affordable housing and it's below no more than 4 stories and does not include a commercial space in the ground level, then you do not have to pay a prevailing wage to the team.
Oh my goodness.
And if you do add those things, then you do. So decisions are being made around what kind of construction we need based upon not having to pay the people who do the construction a livable wage. And that's just the opposite of what we need in our decision making. We need to be making human-centered policy decisions.
Absolutely.
And eliminating any of these loopholes that allow for money, for private interest, for private investment to make those decisions.
Isn't it interesting how easily we can say people over profit, and it's like, no, that is the thing that we are talking about when we say people over profit.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, oh my gosh.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
And it's possible, though. It's possible at the council level to be designing these policies to say, no, it doesn't matter what your goal is or what your project is. If you're going to take our contract money to do this work, you have to pay a prevailing wage no matter what, right? We can build these components, these values into the policies we design. Absolutely. And then the follow-up piece, right? So another thing that just came out was around the mixed use construction or the mixed income construction. And if you're going to build a property over 20 units, X% has to be affordable units, unless you pay a fee per square foot. So it came out recently that there have been companies that have paid the fee. The city's gotten about $5 million in fees, and that fee hasn't actually gone back into creating more affordable housing units to make up for those. And even the buildings that do create the affordable housing units, it's been found that those affordable housing units are left vacant for a year after the building opens, that the property managers aren't necessarily vetting who's moving in to make sure that they're going to families who qualify. And the city responds saying, well, it's not our job to lease the properties. No, but it is our job to create policies that have that circular effect where we are having accountability. Accountability is built into the way that we design the policy, so that we can hold accountable to getting the results that we intend.
I missed a lot.
Well, hi. Do you want to get
Hi,
yourself
Jerry.
all
We
set
really
up there?
dove in.
Well, welcome, Jerry.
Yes.
Jerry,
My name is
Jennifer.
Jerry. I live here. Our studios, our studio is high above Southeast 105th Street. Sorry, my granddaughter's in town and got a little confused. But I'm already delighted that you're here.
Thank you so
Because
much.
there is such a thing as reason. There is such a thing as just outcomes. And we live in a house of mirrors where people are trying to make it look like, but it's like, gee, I wonder what happened to all the people of color in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Gentrification couldn't have anything to do with it. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Williams Avenue, I can't drive down Williams Avenue. Cannot drive down Williams Avenue, which is a cool avenue, but I can't.
Why can't you?
Because that was the heart of the African American community. Well, I was here in the 70s, but the African American community was vibrant here. It was self-sufficient and accomplished and a major stop on the jazz circuit. And then Vanport happened, Vanport was before that. But it's just heartbreaking when diversity is such a gift to have it denied at every turn. So anyway.
Yeah.
And that area had a really rich Portland Black Panthers community that had daily community breakfast for children, and they were displaced intentionally by local government taking over so much of that land.
There was no intent. It just happened. It's just one of those things, you know? Too bad.
Yeah, it's just a coincidence that there's now vacant lots where there used to be homes.
Right.
It's just the nature of business.
Oh, no.
We've got to keep the GDP going.
Oh, not GDP,
What?
though.
We're actually there's a senior affordable housing building in my district in North Portland in the Piedmont neighborhood. So it's 1-2 blocks north of Peninsula Park, called Rosemont Court. And everyone who lived there, it's 100 units. Everyone who lived there was displaced a couple of years ago because of a Legionnaires outbreak. That it's sort of a long backstory, but it never really got solved. But the nonprofit owner has been trying to bring the building back online, but is at the mercy of private investment dictating what work needs to be done, when in reality it probably doesn't. But 40% of that community was low-income seniors of color, and they have been in temporary housing where the county has been paying the adjustment in their rent for 2 years, and many of them left thinking they were going to be gone for 2 weeks, and they're still not home. Wow. And we've just found out, I've been working with the Piedmont Neighborhood Association to try and get Portland Housing Bureau and Oregon Housing and Community Services to the table on, how do we save this property? And they have finally sort of opened up an application process, and we're sort of waiting to hear how things go. But yeah, it's how can we allow even further displacement of low-income communities, of communities of color, of our aging seniors who are in affordable housing, out of these core communities and neighborhoods in our districts. And I reached out to Metro about seeing, as a forefront in housing work in the region, and they said, we're focused on building. We have to build our way out. We can't build our way out if we're losing 100 units at a time.
Yeah.
Actually, someone in another candidate in your district, in District 4, I was at an event, and I was talking to this person about how important it is to me that we establish real, true, equitable community engagement in our new form of government. And they literally responded saying, I would never tell you you're wrong, but that's not going to be possible. It's not going to be possible.
I hate that
And
response.
That's what we're up against. We're up against people who think that it's okay to be a leader in the community that doesn't prioritize engaging and listening to the people that we serve.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, on the one hand, there are a lot of really good candidates in the race this year, but on the other hand, some of the candidates, when I say things like, oh, I really want to take money out of politics, and so I'm running on $1,000, they're like, well, you know, no one's ever done that before, so you would make history, and that's just, like, not possible. And I'm like, I don't do anything unless I'm trying to make history here. Like, that's kind of the goal, right? Like, to keep progressing and learning and growing as people. Like, yeah, we have to look at ways to expand the definition of what's possible. I mean, that's the whole, you know, we're always spiraling upward. They're always looking at that. And then the other thing I've watched candidates do, especially around issues of Palestine and all of that, is say like, oh, well, I privately support a ceasefire, but I don't want to publicly come out and say that. And I'm like, then are you really in integrity with your own values?
I do think this is a point in which these things can change.
Yeah.
I think the form of government has been horrible. I believe the people who generally have inhabited it belong there. And yet, we have a moment where we could actually have representative government with people representing real constituencies addressing real problems without the corrupt baggage. But it's so built into the system that it's going to be it'll take an incredible effort to move people from saying, well, that's a really nice idea, honey, but it's never going to happen. It's like, well, calm down.
But let's go back to the fact that we as a community said, get rid of it. We want something new. We almost don't care what it is.
I think that's true. I think it's anything but this.
And so let's not pretend like the community hasn't spoken up and said, make it different. And we need to work really hard to not allow the old guard to come to the table in the new structure. It's going to take a lot of work because that is where the money and the power is. When people get their ballots, they're going to recognize some names, and most of the others they won't. And so we have to work really hard to make sure that people understand what the new voices bring to the table to make that vision come true that we all wanted when we said, let's do this.
There's a book from long ago called Like a Conquered Province, that the psyche of the United States is like a conquered province, that people feel disempowered, they feel powerless and scared. We're scared more at an existential level than a physical level, but the same things are true. So the community organizing piece, for change to happen, we can't be transactional. Like that comes up, I say that a lot. Like labor unions lost a lot of their heart, soul, when they became transactional. Our goal is to get cards signed. Our goal is to win an election. Not our goal is to create now something a little more complex than the working class that I grew up with. Class consciousness, the sense that we're in this together and we support each other. So then that's mutual aid. It goes mutual, the word is mutual. We're in it working together. So it's going to take a huge effort, and the people who've been at this table have that understanding of the role of community organizing, which, again, is not just about outcomes. It's about giving people hope, and I don't want to say empowering because they actually have power. It's blocked. It's unblocking the power that the dominant society wants to suppress.
Jennifer, do you see that this has the potential to make Portlanders feel empowered about their government? And what can we tell the people to help facilitate that feeling?
I think so. And I think it's an interesting year because larger than our local election, people do feel so lost and out of control. And like what's the point? And I hear that from folks of all different generations, like, what am I even doing participating in this? And I think locally, because we have this big shift, it is a little bit different. People are experiencing it a little bit different. I know even just as people learn about district representation, there are folks coming up to me to talk about the things that are really important to them in their community. And they say, no one's been listening. So even candidates who are just on the campaign journey, people are saying, I actually get to have a voice, a say. I will have representation. And I know that that is citywide, but it certainly resonates deeply in my district and with the people I've been talking to. And I think we're at a really interesting mix where a lot of people are really engaged now because they know what's going on. And every week that engagement grows as people are like, oh, wait, yeah, we did. I remember voting for that change. So that's happening now. And like, okay, what's going to happen in this? And then they get more empowered. So I think that it is a beautiful opportunity to really tell people that they are invited to the table.
So would you see... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that to your point about that sort of two-faced piece of playing the game of politics, I think is going to make things a little bit, is where things get tricky for the candidates who are out there trying to be genuine, because there is so much political game still happening that is going to be part of this local election as well.
Right.
That's going to make it difficult, but...
So it seems like you're saying if this new city council of 12 is able to get into office and make changes that are visible and they can be loud enough about it so that Portlanders can see, look at that, they are listening to me finally. You feel like that's a moment that could be used to clinch like engagement again in the city?
I think so, and I think we have the opportunity to even do that leading up, like to actually, I mean, there are already so many forums and town halls happening, like coffee with the candidate. I'll be doing a couple of those in the coming weeks, and like there's already so much opportunity to let people know that the folks who want to represent them are already listening, that I think we can start rebuilding that hope and that trust in already, even before November. But it will be critical that when we get across, whoever gets inside creates a system that really actualizes those values. And because if we say this and we tell people this is what's going to happen, and then we get in and we don't have that level of community engagement, if we still require people to fill out a form online so that in 6 weeks they can show up on a Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. to have us literally look down on them as they give their 3 minutes of testimony, then
goodness.
Then it's gonna fall apart, right? People will say, forget it, forget the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that is 100% accurate of what happens. Andrew just went through it, and it's disgusting.
And this is at like a city council meeting?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's graphic. That was graphic. But here's what I've been thinking, and this is how I think about things in general. Boy, there's a lot of pressure to do a lot of stuff when you're running for office, and it cuts into our ability. So let me just back up a minute. It's just like in popular education, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept, but popular education is based on the idea that there's people who have some knowledge, and then there's the community who has an enormous amount of knowledge that you don't. So when we imagine, and I think we can do a pretty good job of it, what people need, what we really need to do is ask them what they need. And then we need to ask them, how do you think that could happen? So in other words, it engages them in thinking about the process. So those, standing on street corners talking to people, it's making that human connection more than it is about communicating the information. Both have to happen, but is like causes that to go deeper in than just in here. So these are nice words as opposed to bad words, but what do you need? How can I help you?
And it's our job to go and ask the question and not just say, well,
Bingo.
You can come over here
No,
if
exactly.
you want.
So town halls need to not be, here's a place you can all come there. No, you need to go to the neighborhood associations. You need to go to any kind of public setting and have real conversations with people, not talk to them,
Well, and it's sharing power when many people get into politics to hold power and saying that I do not need to sit up on this dais above you because I'm just here representing you.
Yeah.
Well, and you're part of an us. It's not, and even if you say I am representing you, you've created a bit of a space.
Yeah.
So the more that we can realize, I live in this community. I want this for my children, my friends, all, and then we're in it together. I'm not doing it. We're doing it. I'm just one piece.
And I've had a conversation with another candidate, I believe they're District 3 candidate, where we were really talking about how do we actualize equitable community engagement? How do we do that? And their argument was like, well, we're just going to wind up only hearing one voice. If you're only hearing one voice, then you're not doing the work to get out there and engage with everyone.
Yeah, with regard to what you said about the city council people looking down on the testimony givers, that has been true at every meeting I have watched. But I've also started thinking, like, how often does this room sit empty? How often do people need community spaces and can't find them because they have to pay for them?
Yeah.
Why isn't our public offices, why aren't they available to the public? Why can't we host meetings there? Why are these exclusive venues? Why do we need sanctioned and specific venues for these city council meetings that only take place once or twice or maybe 3 times a week? And and so I started thinking about, like, as they start talking about, we need to have district offices for the city councilors, and I understand that the desire is to have them spend a lot of time in their specific district. But it's like, okay, but are we making sure that that's a dual purpose space? And are we repurposing spaces well? Are we just looking to give another construction, contract out to somebody? Or, are we using sustainable building materials? There's so much to think about that I feel really wary about any time they're like, well, we need to build more things, we need to buy more things. I'm like, really? Do we? Because we have 30% office vacancy downtown. So maybe we should rethink how much we're building and get real curious about that.
And how can we get creative about how we get into the community without it being anchoring us and pinning us in one office space in our district? Because even that, like, okay, here's your accessibility point now, my entire district of 160,000 people, right? No. How do we actually get out into our communities?
Well, that's a great point, given just the nature of how the world works has changed, right? I mean, when we were kids, it was like, you've made it when you get the corner office or whatever. But even by the time I was moving into the career space, we were hearing, I was a designer, we were hearing, no, that's not the goal anymore. The people who are rising up now as leaders in businesses, they don't give a shit about the corner office. They want flexibility. So you're right. We can take our offices with us in a backpack anywhere we go. And so you're not wrong that you don't really have to live in that one location. You absolutely can be out among the people you serve.
Yep, absolutely. And we can think more creatively about how we're getting to the people who need the support as well. It's something that's come up with the bottle drop drama going on now. I know in our district there's a specific location on Lombard that's been identified for a bottle drop, and the community really doesn't want it to be there. And that whole kind of conversation spirals also into, do we just repeal the bottle drop bill, which I think is devastating, because it's really just inspired by people being mad that they have to see poverty. But what if we actually made these spaces? We know that there is extremely high need, and that the people with this extremely high need are going to these centers every day. How do we go to these bottle drop facilities and connect with people and get them access to the services that they need? How do we turn these into community centers where we are really connecting with people? Let's actually look and say, where are the people who need our support? And let's go to them. It just sort of the same sort of conversation on the other side. One is, how do we get to the people to do our work? And two is, how do we get to the people to help them get what they need and help them with their life.
Yeah, when that bottle bill thing has been really up, and in my district they shut down one of the ones, like the main, I think it was like outside of a Safeway, and they shut it down. And there was like an opinion article that I read on it, and it was like, this is not a victory, this was a sweep, and to call it anything else is just wrong. It was a sweep. You just displaced people. That's all you did. You just displaced people. And talking to nonprofit directors who are dealing directly with the houseless community, they're saying, like, the thing that makes our job hardest to connect people up with services is the sweeps. Because when people are forced to move their tents every week or every 2 weeks, which is like 60% of the houseless community in Portland, moving every week or 2 weeks, how are you supposed to find that person again? Mm-hmm. Not all of these people have phones. Not all of these people know how to get around the city. And when they want to ask for directions from some random person walking down the street, they get shamed for it. Right? Yep. So it's like, how, like, and what I've been really told over and over again as I'm working with these nonprofits is, it's your job to set the expectations on the timeline. And it's going to take some time to get these people into housing. And so in the meantime, we need to allow them to exist where they are. And that's the message we need to be getting out to the community, is like, if you really want this problem to go away, we cannot keep displacing people, because that's causing and proliferating and elongating this problem, quote unquote, that we have.
Yeah. And the new camping ban, it's just saying, oh, there happens to be this bed in this place that may not meet your needs in any way, shape, or form, but because it exists, you need to abandon everything you own and go there or be arrested. And so I was at Central City Concern a couple of weeks ago because they had candidate office hours, and they were talking about how we don't even have like a comprehensive system for knowing what is available. There will be a case manager there who has a client that needs a bed, and they literally have to pick up the phone and call an organization, say, do you have any beds? No? Call the next organization. Do you have any beds? There's not a central system. So the fact that we think that people who have no resources should be able to navigate that system is ridiculous. And it's unreasonable. We need to shift our expectations and be prioritizing the actual human component of it.
You know what is so shitty is knowing that if those beds were going for a price per night, there would be an app.
Yes.
For everyone to fucking figure out where they were going.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
The technology exists.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it does.
I experience the same thing in my work in education. It's like there's not money for tech in education. And so like I use an app all the time for the programming that I do. And I can't even like tell it a date range for a report. My options are this week, last 30 days. And I'm like, somebody has a couple of lines of code out there that could clean this up, but there's no money here. So they just don't do it. And it's the same in all of these service industries. We could have it, but the city council can be that leadership. Yeah. It can be the leadership that says, all right, let's unify all of this work. We have an incredible amount of nonprofit work happening here. Let's be the leader that makes it all come together. And then the amount of money we will save, not only for the city, but in all of these organizations, the amount of people they will be able to serve because we've streamlined everything will jump dramatically. We have that opportunity to not just say, here's the check to you, you, and you. We hope the best that you will achieve what we all want to achieve, but we can actually say we need to put systems in place and we're going to dedicate our efforts to making that happen.
Yeah, and I hear that. And as I'm also talking to these nonprofit directors, one of the things that they tell me is when you're houseless, most of your time is spent waiting in lines. And that really like shifted my perspective around everything. Because to be honest, like I come from like very heavy climate activism background. And so like the housing concern issues were a little bit new to me. Like working at Scrap PDX downtown, I definitely like interfaced with the community and did a lot of like de-escalation training and things of that nature, but didn't have as much visibility into all of these issues. So I really had to go and seek out the people who've been doing work on the ground and learn from them. And they're like, like, I really appreciate that you're not trying to come in here with solutions. Like, you're asking questions, and that's all we want. We just want the city leaders to come in here with a little bit of curiosity.
I think two words have popped up a few times, being curiosity and creativity. And I have really strong feelings about that as a mother of two neurodivergent kiddos, and also who have experienced some pretty significant trauma in their life through no fault of their own. And that is important, how we address those young people who are going to be the adults in this city in just a few years makes all the difference. And I think it's very clear to them when we've decided that their needs don't need our funding.
Yeah.
I think they can tell. They don't know what happens in those boardrooms, but they see it.
Yeah, it was really interesting because when we were talking with Darrell, who does a lot of youth engagement, he was talking about just a few years ago, just a few decades ago, like, I couldn't vote as a person of color. And, how much is it like that we tell the youth they don't have a vote? How much is that a civil rights issue? And I had never even really fully considered that. And, thinking about, for instance, and I think they postponed this on a ballot measure until 2026, but when the participatory budgeting was going around, one of the biggest things that I liked about it was that it gave the youth a voice to talk about how the discretionary funds of the city were spent, which I don't think there's any other real developed government structure that allows the youth to get engaged on that level, other than as like a figurehead sort of a thing. Like, oh, this is the nominated 6th grader who gets to come and sit on a city council meeting, like
right, performative.
Yeah.
Is that new? Because I know that they have been trying to get participatory budgeting on the ballot for this November.
Yeah, they decided it was a recent thing that they decided to postpone it until 2026. I know, it's kind of devastating.
Yeah, because when I first heard about it, I was like, okay, I want to know more, because I want to make sure that we're not setting aside 2% of our budget for the privileged people who have the time and capacity to come to the table and have the conversation. And they shared with me lots of research, folders of research that they've done, and youth engagement in participatory budgeting was a huge component of it. That was really exciting, giving youth in a channel to understand and engage with civic engagement and a way to be part of the community. But I mean, so that's news to me that it's been postponed, but the council can do it anyway.
Yeah, true.
The council can say, we're going to have participatory budgeting.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing that I really loved about it was that in the cities that have done that, they're seeing bigger voter turnout because they get the voters have more say in how the funds actually get spent. So you move from, it's a partial move, but it's a small move from representational style government to like direct active government, where the people are literally the ones deciding where the funds go. And so that was part of what was really exciting to me, that like trying to give that participation element back to the community. And I think, like, as we're going from 4 city councilors to 12 city councilors, and that's great because there's going to be more access and more people to reach out to the community of a city of 650,000 people, right? But then we also need to have these structures that allow for kind of a tiered system of, the neighborhood associations, I think, act as kind of micro governments in the neighborhoods, not necessarily like policy-wise or rule-wise, but in terms of listening. And so, as the districts have shaken all the neighborhood associations up as well, like really looking at that as an opportunity to help build participation in the community and help even inform people of what they are. Because I think I told Timur on a previous episode that when I'm like, oh, have you talked to your neighborhood association about that? And then someone responded with like, you mean the HOA? I'm like, oh, no. Those are different. Let's talk about that.
We also have to look at, because I know as they sort of restructured the organizations that support the neighborhood associations to align with the districts, they more or less balanced the budgets by district. And some district associations were angry about that because they have a lot more neighborhood associations. And I think we actually need to look at the work that needs to go into supporting those communities that don't have neighborhood associations.
Oh, for sure.
Where,
Yeah.
how can we invest that money
Yeah.
in uniting
Yes.
that community, organizing that community so that they
Yes.
have that representation and that voice?
Well, what's so interesting to me, and this for me is like really representative of some of the puzzles and the prioritization that we're going to be facing if we get elected, is so that when they split the districts, it's based on population. And then they gave all of the neighborhood association coalitions within those districts the same amount of money based on population. But because, say, District 4, my district, is a lot less densely populated, it tends to have more neighborhood associations with fewer people in them. So those fewer people are getting more money, or less money per neighborhood association, but like the same amount of money per person in the district. And so like having to balance like, okay, why don't other districts have as many neighborhood associations? Why are the neighborhoods bigger in those districts? And what does that mean? And how do we encourage participation? And then also, you know, thinking about like how does that create different power structures? And so there's a lot that goes into thinking about that. And so I understand and have been hearing from my neighborhood association coalitions that they're very frustrated about the budget crunch. But I'm like, okay, but there's a lot to think about here, because why, for instance, why does every individual neighborhood association need its own insurance? Insurance for what? And why? And like, can we just have like district neighborhood association insurance so that you're not all independently paying this insurance bill that you need money for the city from? You know, it's just like,
Andra, the insurance companies won't like that. Are you
oh,
serious?
I'm sure they already hate me. I'm on their.
I went to a city-led info session on those transitions, and the one that I was able to get to because of scheduling was on the west side in your district. And so it was led by the nonprofit that will be overseeing that. And they were bringing that to the table, and I just kept saying, but it's the same number of people. And the executive director of the nonprofit that is overseeing District 4 looked at me and said, we don't serve people, we serve associations. And I was like, what are the associations for? Like, what do you mean you don't serve people?
Yeah.
Like,
How is that got
you might be in the
mixed?
wrong business.
And what was really interesting to me, because I think I talked to that director of the neighborhood association, and one thing she said was like, well, we give grants to the nonprofits in the district, and we're not going to be able to do that now that the budget is changing. So I was like, well, that's really interesting. So as a city council person, if I were going to change that structure of the budget, I would ask them like, okay, well, what are you spending money on? And can the city help these nonprofits instead of you directly helping these nonprofits to stay alive? And also, why are these nonprofits looking to you for funding? You know, and so like asking those questions and making sure that as we're building new budget structures that everything gets caught. You know, because I feel like that was an oversight of like, oh, well, yeah, they are doing this community service in these ways that maybe the city councilors didn't understand when they developed the budget thing. And so there's just going to be a lot of really interesting choices like that.
Why does that seem like a little bit of an exploitable system, though? If, you know, Joe runs the neighborhood association and I'm Bill and I have this nonprofit in the area that Joe runs, and like we're buddies. And they're supporting my nonprofit, heavy air quotes, right? Am I wrong about that? Like, it seems very exploitable.
I mean, that's kind of how the whole system works.
Okay, I know. Oh.
So here's one of the thoughts that comes to me, and it's I have no idea literally what it would look like in practice, but it goes back to barefoot doctors in China in the 1960s with their satchels, and they would just wander through the countryside. And then I sort of marry the idea of an ombudsperson with that, and I realized there needs to be flying squads of people who can go to assist neighborhood associations in figuring stuff out, can go to whatever structure of people there is. So there's a huge need for someone who understands the system well enough to explain it to other people, to help them figure out how their needs can in some way intersect with those systems. So what I realize is all the little nonprofits, they all kind of do that, but it's not in any way coordinated. And I don't want it to be organized, and that's not what I mean. What I mean is pooling resources, but also I think learning how to have those conversations. Because we talked about there are different ways of talking to constituents. Mm-hmm. Oh wait, to your neighbors.
Yes, yes.
Did I say constituent? I meant neighbor. No, really neighbor. What do people need? Not here's some things we can give them. Mm-hmm. What do they need? And in what form do they need it so they can actually use it? Mm-hmm. So it's like putting something on a bulletin board and said, well, we told them. Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? That isn't how it works. It's not at all how it works. And here I have that problem some. So it's all about communicating, and it's all about truly believing that we're in this together, and that all our well-being is a single well-being, and that we can't fix ourselves or even our neighborhood without putting it all together.
Well, I'm curious, what would you say is a value that you hold that you filter everything else through?
I think much of what you're talking about, Jerry, is like that human lens. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm getting my master's in public administration, and so much of what I learned through studying policy is that we really haven't created a way for the human component, the needs, the values of the people as an input into our calculations of what we do. We have not, there is not, we've studied so much, here's all these different ways to create policy. None of them are, where does the human value input come in? Really creating the impact. And then we say the impact that it has on our community and the need our community has is actually more important than the impact it has on the budget and the cost. Mm-hmm. How do we flip those? So the human lens, and then the other that I think we really need to embed is the climate impact of everything. So not just so much climate conversation is what's the one policy we're going to adopt that addresses it, right? Is it no more freeways? Is it more investment in public transit? Is it this or that? No, we need to actually look at every single policy that we're designing and say, how do we use a climate lens to look at this? So I did a policy study around commercial conversions because, as you mentioned earlier, we have a 30% vacancy rate in commercial buildings. And last year, the state legislature cleared the way to do commercial conversions. It is possible for us now. And commercial conversions actually have significantly higher benefits in terms of climate impact to new development, because the climate impact on the actual construction is dramatically more impactful. And then we're taking these old buildings and we're upgrading them so that their actual footprint has a reduced climate impact. So that's a housing issue. But if we use a climate lens, we can really reframe our decisions. So just taking those things, and every single thing we're going to look at, every single issue we need to address, we have to say, okay, what does it look like from the climate perspective? What does it look like from the human-centered perspective? And that is something that we discuss in public administration, is the way that a particular lens lets us see things in a certain way. And that lens will also, blind you to other things. So you've got to constantly be like looking through all the different lenses. So we look at a problem and we say, what policies can we create? And then how is that going to look from all of these different perspectives that turn our values into inputs in these calculations we're making about what we need to do?
But I don't want to look through the lens of greed and avarice.
Fair.
But I have to.
We've done that.
I have to, don't I? I have to do that because otherwise I don't understand.
That's where we
happening.
find the loopholes. That's where we find the loopholes.
Right, yeah, and then you can cinch those closed. Yeah.
I find myself thinking about what you're saying in terms of needing to have the human input, and have to admit, I can see how hard that probably has been for people in leadership roles. You know, how 150,000 people in your district, right? How on earth do you actually get out there and hear their real voices? And Jerry, don't side-eye me. But I find myself thinking again about apps and recognizing that we have this AI technology that is actually pretty good at understanding what we're saying when we say it. And it just makes me wonder, like, you know, public comments. That doesn't have to be a person sitting there reading through it and trying to understand what they care about. Those inputs now could happen on a much broader, massive scale and take in anybody who wants to have their say in the city. It could take it into account and have an understanding of what people are actually caring about underneath the words they're saying almost.
Well,
And it's about creating all of the channels so that everyone has access.
Yeah,
There's an access point for each person. So no, we don't need to get out to every meeting of every neighborhood association or every faith-based organization to hear from their community. But we can figure out who's participating and who isn't, and how do we ensure that everyone has an access point to engaging. Much like when we look at housing, and I like to look at housing from a much broader continuum than we often do. So starting back at affordability and instability, whereas much of the conversation often starts at houselessness. How do we back it up and keep people from losing their housing? But when we think about houselessness, we need a lot of different styles of re-entry into housing so that everyone's needs are met, because one channel is not going to be what works for everyone. Some people do really well in dormitory style shelter until they're ready to connect to housing. Other people, that's really traumatic and difficult for them, and they can't engage with that. Some people do extremely well in safe rest villages because they are in their own pod with a locking door and they can start to rebuild that security. And others do not do well in that kind of isolated environment or where you need to take responsibility for a space. We need to have a lot of different access channels. So just like with community engagement, also with housing reentry, we need to not be looking at one particular right answer path forward, but how do we open all of the doors so that people can decide which door is right for them to walk through?
Oh, I love that.
maybe the first step is wanting to open them.
Well, that's a good point too.
The
Right,
first step
yeah.
is us as a community getting people into our new government who want to open the doors.
There
Yeah,
you go.
no, that's really true.
Yeah, as you're talking about this, and especially the commercial conversions, I'm super, super interested in that, because the biggest hurdle, quote unquote, that I've heard talked about is like, oh, well, it's really expensive to convert it into residential housing because, you know, you have to have an egress window and this thing and that thing and permits and whatever. But as I was thinking about it, I'm like, okay, really, it just takes some creativity, as Patty said. But so let's say we have this office building, right? It's really tall and it has these many floors. And let's say we convert it so that, okay, we have these office windows, right? So we'll use the outside perimeter of the floor as the like actual residential units. There's already these giant bathrooms that we can just have as communal bathrooms. And then in the center of these floors, why don't we have like a restaurant or a shop or, you know, something that is community centric. And then those people can literally live and work in the same place if they want to. And how much more does that create walkable communities? How much does that create community resilience and potentiality for mutual aid? And like, and like, I think the other thing that we overlook as we talk about affordable housing, or as like the broader community talks about affordable housing, is there's an expectation that people will move on. And that's not always the case for people. That's not always possible, you know? And so how are we looking at building communities that anyone would want to live in? Or, you know, and having like, you know, not a one size fits all solution, but having these options available and not having to push them into something else down the road. And, you know, I know that looks a lot like socialism to some people, but I do think that you're bringing in that community element. And I think Portland was recently recently considered the most introverted city in the U.S. And that's not really great for forming community.
Yeah.
And I think, like, how do we build more walkable structures? How do we have more, public transit and all of these things? Like, all of these factors come together to create that community element. And when we have that community element, then we could really start making change.
I invented a new word recently, unhunker.
Unhunker. I like
like
it.
it.
All
Yeah.
hunkered down to deal with COVID,
Yep.
and we need to learn to unhunker because the pattern of how people interacted before COVID and after is not the same, and it's devastating for this understandable kind of desire to stay safe, but you can't build a community in that hunkered down. So unhunker. You
Yeah.
heard it here first.
I like it. I'm with you on, like, really thinking creatively about how we do that conversion. I mean, the affordable housing that I worked in, they were SROs, so people lived in individual rooms and there were shared bathrooms, and so I think that could be a really interesting way. I know that seismic upgrades is a big cost, that people bring up in why commercial conversion isn't feasible, but I would love to see the information on how upgrading a building to meet these requirements in any capacity is so significantly more expensive than tearing it down and rebuilding something new. And then again, okay, what are these numbers, and how do we say, well, actually, it's worth the extra cost because of the climate impact that it helps, and because of how quickly we can turn over units, right? We can't continue to wait just to build out. So if we take that human-centered lens and that climate-centered lens, then we can say, okay, yeah, it is a little bit more expensive because of XYZ, but we've decided that has value, that price tag has value for these important reasons that are important to us as a community. And also thinking about, like, the way that we can convert these historically business-centered environments where all of the little businesses, the restaurants and the stores are only open, from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. If we turn these into living communities, then our small businesses thrive because they can be open 7 days a week and be actually serving people. And we're talking about how we can bring downtown, revitalize it as an arts district. How about some live workspaces in these commercial conversions, right? We can be really creative. We just have to be willing to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about your experience with collaborating with other candidates within your district or across districts, and if you have any thoughts or suggestions about, like, how you as a community leader kind of poised in, learning about the administration and the policy, how you're navigating that and trying to make changes now before you even get into office.
Mm-hmm. I think I haven't totally figured out what the right balance is of collaborating and teaming up and saying, we're gonna do this together versus, like, have my own vision. But I love having conversations with everybody. And so anytime I'm invited to participate in things in district or across districts, I'm always trying to be there because, I think we get to push those conversations, right? I've referenced a couple of different conversations I've had with other candidates where we had opposing views, but I get to say, no, like, I really think equitable community engagement is really important and that's going to have to be foundational, and we get to push that conversation. I mean, there's so many candidates that I feel like even I am not sure what the 6 bubbles that I'll tick on my ballot will be in November just yet. But it's very exciting. And I think it's going to, I cannot even pretend that I'm going to know what it's going to look like by November. It feels like it changes every week.
Oh, I know. I've been asked by a number of people, like, oh, who are the front runners in your district? And I'm like, Are you talking about money? Because I don't talk about money. Like, I don't really want to have that conversation, and it's way too early to say and all of these things. But yeah, I hear you on the, there being a lot of candidates. And I think for me, it's just really exciting to know that there are 70 plus really deeply engaged people in their own communities who are all coming together with their own different lens. And that is a treasure, even in of itself. Like, forget the 12 who get elected for a second. We have 70 people who are stepping up right now and saying, I want to do everything I can in my power to make Portland a better place. So why not collaborate with those 70 people? Why not start, working with them and learning who they are and developing those relationships that will last longer than this election, right?
Yep, absolutely. And it feels like even though there is such a large collection of candidates, it's also opening up people's minds to like, oh, we don't have to just go with the name we recognize. There are so many people. I should pay attention to what they're saying. So I think there's benefit to it as well.
I just have a quick question about the balance of young progressive candidates. Out of that 70, what percentage do you think would you estimate?
What do you define as young?
Under 50?
Well, let's say people who would be more likely to identify with the old style of politics because it's what they've known, and people who are bringing a fresh perspective. Let's do it that way, not age-based, but...
I think there's a larger perspective of folks who are bringing a new perspective. So I think there are a group who do sort of want to see things done in the same way, who are kind of stuck on like incremental change that I think we need to go beyond. And then I think there's a larger collection of people who really want to push the needle and really want to do things differently. And then within that, I think there are people who have really interesting vision and ideas, and there are people who are excited to play the game of politics and are excited for the fight and want to be a winner. And I think it's like, I do not like that part. Like, I really like the work. I really like the policy. I really like the people and the talking, but having to figure out strategy and how you build your base and how you get to 20,000 votes, like that stuff's really really challenging. And there are people who are in it because they like that piece.
I would say from my perspective that as I've been associating with the candidates, there's maybe about a fourth who are like young progressive people. There's a surprising number of the people in the other 3/4 who are business owners, and that concerns me, just because that's going to bring in a very capitalistic lens that concerns me. And then I would say that I've also heard of quite a surprising number of candidates who are more progressive, more radical, more leftist, who are running as moderate candidates because their political committee told them that would be more successful. And that I've heard that from multiple people, and that also really bothers me. Like, I just want you to be transparent. I just want you to say what you want to say. I don't want you to pull your punches, like, and as a very transparent person myself, who is like staunchly not listening to any kind of political committee, like it scares me that there's that kind of influence, and that is that old power, old structure, old money talking when they're saying like, you need to run as a more moderate candidate.
Well, the thing I don't really like about that is I would love to have a progressive candidate that stays progressive when they get into office. And so I'm also kind of turned off by the idea of, I'm going to pretend to be moderate so I can get elected and do these progressive things. I don't really like that.
It's a huge red flag for me.
Well, and if they're playing the game now, they're going to play the game when they get in there too.
Great point.
Of like making the exchanges on, I'll give you this if you give me that, instead of just holding fast and voting to their values and the values that their community voted them in for.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've had this experience, but it's been so interesting because there are some traits going on of just like, hey, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you kind of a thing. And some of that I feel like is just general community building. Like, you know, it's a mutuality or reciprocity sort of a thing. But it's interesting because for the first time in my life, I'm like trading my presence or like public appearance for like background community engagement. So I'm like, oh, I never once considered that like me showing up at a place is like valuable to you. That's cool and weird, and I don't know how to feel about that. So I guess like, what's your experience with like, I guess like losing your anonymity?
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange. It'll be sort of just a personal growth process for sure, of because there have even been times that, like, you know, my husband and I will go out for a date night and I'm like, oh, like I might have to, like, I might be noticeable one day, and that's totally going to change like how we just go out and, you know, be people in the community, which we would of course still do, but it just makes you rethink that picture. But yeah, sort of like when people support and what that looks like and what those partnerships are, I am learning. I am at kindergarten level of those nuances for sure.
It's wild. It's wild. Yeah.
Ooh. I don't envy the people who are truly famous. It sounds terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, they call it public service for a reason.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. But again, and it feels like this resonates with you as well. Like the mission that brings us to this work drives us through all of those challenges as well.
For
Just
sure.
like,
For sure.
I truly feel that I am here to do right by my community, to progress our culture and our local network and our who we are as a Portland society forward. And so all those other things, they can be scary in those moments. Those are the days when I'm like, why am I doing this? And then, but most of the time it's like, I know why I'm doing this.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And you get through.
Yeah, so one thing that I've also just been really like having to remind myself constantly is like rest is also part of the revolution. Because I think there's this tendency to go and attend all of the events, and a lot of the candidates have, you know, full-time jobs also, and then the campaigning is another full-time job. And so for me, I keep reminding myself, like, we are acting right now as role models in our community, and that also means modeling rest. So I guess I'm really curious about how that's coming into play for you and what strategies you're using to maintain your energy as you go through this process.
I think collaborating with my family on where our boundaries are has been really important. So, like, I've had to say no to things because they fall on birthdays, and that's off limits, right? Like, I really want to attend this thing, but my kid just turned 13 a couple weeks ago, and you know what? I'm not going to a campaign thing on her 13th birthday. Off limits. And also, like, finding those moments of rest. After my campaign launch party, I went home and I slept for 13 hours straight. 13 hours. I think I went to bed at like 6 or 7 p.m. I slept for 13 hours straight. And then I woke up the next day like, all right, let's do it. Let's go burn it down. We got this. But you've got to protect the boundaries for sure. And I work full time. I have a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old. I live in a 3-generation home. My mom lives with us. I'm going to grad school. So it's a lot of what is the priority today? Is it getting out that newsletter? Is it reading that chapter? Is it watching a movie with my kids? Is it catching up on RuPaul with my 13-year-old and my mom? It
Very
might be.
important.
It might be.
Very important.
So just being aware. But
Gotta
yeah.
get that sleigh. I love that. I love that so much.
Exactly.
As someone who's done drag a few times, I'm just like, oh, all the hearts, exploding hearts. Yes. Love it, love it.
But what about you?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of boundary management. And I think, too, like, I don't know if you experience this, but when I'm today scheduling events that are, like, months in the future, it's easy to say, like, oh, yeah, I'm totally going to have energy for that. And then I get there and I'm like, I've done like 7 campaign events this week and I cannot do a single another thing. And so really being like giving myself a lot of grace to say like, hey, I know that I said I would be here, but I really, really need some time to myself and really making sure that I'm communicating well about that and, you know, not letting people down, but also like being real about I am also a human being and I need to eat and I need to sleep. And so, yeah, just like offering a lot of grace to myself. And I really love that you brought in the, you know, having those conversations with your family, because what I don't think that people realize about running for office is that it is a big energy drain essentially on like your whole community structure. And if you don't have friends and family standing behind you, ready to catch you, like, I don't know that you can run successfully. And it, you know, like, there's just so much to talk about, and you're meeting all of these new people, and like what structures do you have to hold all of that bigness that you're a part of now? And so really, yeah, I love that you said having those conversations with your family. And I think also for me, it's about learning what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are, and growing on the weakness front, but also playing to my strengths where I can. And like, I'm really good at like digital communication, and I have a lot of like time at the computer, and I really like texting. And so what does that look like in terms of building relationships that way? And another thing that I've done is I have a really hard time with just commuting and fossil fuels and all of the things that come into that. And so I really, really try like to use public transit or just don't do cross-city travel very much. And so if an event is taking place like really, really far away from me, like, you know what, I'm going to have to let the people who are in that district handle that thing, because this is just a little bit prohibitive to me and my transportation access right now. And that has helped a lot, because transportation to me, and you know, this might not be true for all people, but for me is a huge energy sink. And so what does it look like can we move this to Zoom? Can we, you know, not have to pay money to have this space where fewer people might show up because they don't have a place to give their kid for daycare, you know, all those things, right? So like, how can we leverage that virtual space? How can we get creative about building these digital connections in addition to these in-person connections, and finding balance in that? So
it also gives you a lot of empathy for what people in your community live every day as well.
Yes.
Right? And like, and making communities where people can live and work and stay in place, and giving power to people who see that and appreciate that, and have that lived experience. But yeah, having that strength of your community is incredibly important. I know there was one day, and I don't remember, you know, what made me feel so exhausted this one particular day, but I just went home and I was like, I don't know. Should I be doing this? Maybe I should stop. And my husband was just like, no, and just gave me a hug. Aww. And it was just like, okay, here we go. Aww. Right? It's just like, they've got your back. Yeah. And it's representative of the fact that like, we really are campaigning on being with the people, right? Like, we are, I think both of us are really about being the body in that chair that's representing our communities. And so if we're not campaigning where we are relying on our community, for sure, then it's just a false narrative.
Beautiful. Would you say that you have any people who are especially good mentors or teachers to you, or any books that have especially influenced you on this path, or any, like, I don't know, central issues that you really want to bring forward?
That's a good question. I think right now, my cohort community for my grad program, so the one that I'm doing, we have a cohort. I'm with the same group of folks every class throughout the whole thing. And we really unite in just what we're getting out of our growth as individuals through the program, and what things we really push back on as you're teaching us about a historic system that we kind of want to dismantle. So let's have that conversation. So it's really inspiring to be able to be part of a community that sees things that same way. And then because of this journey we're all on together, they're extremely supportive of me running for office as this sort of like progress that we're all sort of moving toward. And so it does feel like a little, group of folks pushing me along. So I'd say right now that's really where I get a lot of that strength and inspiration, and much of like the reading that we do. We might read something in a class that we don't necessarily vibe with, and then everyone's throwing out suggestions. You should read this. You should read this.
Nice.
Here's an article I found on this other piece. And so it's like a whole nother level of like educational nourishment that comes along with the actual program.
I love that. Yeah. Some of my mentors talk about teach learning, learn teaching, and just like really engaging with, we all have something to learn from each other. We all have something to teach each other. And like Jerry said earlier about that community education, popular education. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's...
So I've been thinking a lot about the buzzwords that are being thrown around this year in the city election, and among them are revitalize downtown and also public safety. And I'm finding that every candidate has a different definition of what that means, but they're all throwing around the same phrasing.
Livability,
yes. Yeah, so I guess I'm curious about what are your takes on that, and how are you differentiating yourself from other candidates in those ways?
I have found myself falling back on some of those buzzwords as well, and that's not to say that I don't see them as buzzwords. I definitely do. I think for me, so like public safety is one that I talk about, on my platform, but I'm being really specific about what I mean by that. And then I even reference, here is some things that you should listen to or read, or some research that I found to support this context. I do get frustrated when I see candidates just sort of say, we need to improve the livability of our, what does that mean to you? Like, what does that actually mean to you? So public safety to me is fully funding Portland street response and turning public safety into actually being about having services available that people need, not just like policing our communities, and empowering our police oversight boards. So here's an example. We have piloted body-worn cameras. Well, there are some really great studies about how to implement body-worn cameras in a way that are actually benefiting the community. And one of the most important things you can do is actually put the power of oversight over those in the hands of a community advisory board that is not associated with the police bureau at all. And we're actually set to have a independent oversight committee launch next year, but there is a ballot measure collecting signatures right now that is preemptively trying to remove the power from that committee. So making it so that they aren't making requirements, they're making suggestions, they're expanding who can serve on that community so that people who are former law enforcement can serve on the police oversight committee, and several other changes. And the ACLU is fighting it. The ACLU of Oregon is fighting it, but it was brought by a attorney for the police union. So really thinking about how we're addressing these things in ways that are, again, going back to that human-centered lens, what does the research show? What do our test studies show? Our places that have done this successfully show as the way that we should be doing it so that it supports the people the best. But yeah, expanding Portland Street Response is one, really completely restructuring how we budget public safety so that Portland Police Bureau doesn't have its own little pot of money that it can do whatever it wants with, and everyone else has to sort of scramble to put it all together.
Maybe no more non-lethal or lethal munitions. I
Yeah.
know that the city just approved an emergency budget for all of that.
For the protest response team,
Awful.
and their less lethal munitions to get ready for summer in Portland and November election in Portland. Yeah, instead of investing in mental and behavioral health supports that actually, if we funded Portland Street Response to operate 24/7, we could trigger federal funding from Medicare to support that program. But the fact that we don't do that, we are closing the door on bringing money in to help that program. And it's all just power and old systems. But back to your question of these buzzwords, for me, it comes down to you've got to back up what you're talking about, and say, be really specific, and have sort of your context. Like, I've actually done the research here. I've actually looked into this, and I have sources for you. I'm not just making this up based upon my perspective.
I think it's really telling what you're saying about that you will use those words, but then back it up so that people are really clear on what it means to you. Because I think it's a pretty strong tactic in the world of propaganda to have buzzwords and to assume that in other ways you have primed the people hearing those buzzwords to think of it the way you want them to think of it. Right? And so we don't have to define it if we're just assuming that people are already primed. And so you're able to bust that, right? You're getting their attention with the buzzword, but instead of, too often those are used to trigger a feeling or an emotional response in people instead of well, what's the definition? And so you're circumventing that by giving a definition. And I think that's what needs to happen.
I think deconstructing the terms is critically important. What is public safety? Is it giving unlimited resources to the police bureau to crush every expression of First Amendment rights? No, some people would think that's public safety. It's not. But I generally think, you're so right. There was a time when I was young and tried to be rigorous. I still do. I'm old and rigorous, but rigor mortis. No, rigorous.
We should call you Jerry with the jokes.
Thank you. But that's exciting to me that you can actually consciously do that. You can say public safety is really important. What exactly does that mean? Well, here's what I think it means. So now actually you're having a conversation and not an exchange of memes. I learned that word. I'm not entirely sure what it means.
But also examples, I think, help the conversation a lot. So, you'll hear me talk about that I don't think shoplifting is the problem we need to tackle. I think the fact that so many people's needs aren't being met, that they have to revert to stealing baby formula, is the issue we have to address. Right?
Fuck yes.
People... Yes, it can be very difficult for a person with a physical disability to get down a sidewalk that has tents and tarps. But the issue isn't that there are tents and tarps blocking the sidewalk. It's that there are people that have nowhere to go. So it's talking about the actual, having those examples helps too with the backing up of the buzzword conversation.
I think that's really important. And the examples that you gave, it's not enough to block. You also then have to open. You have to resist the buzzword part, and then you have to do just what you said. Those examples, I actually think people can hear those and be affected by them. I just had a conversation with my granddaughter. I'll never ever give up hope because I know that it's just blocked. All of those forces that are necessary to do what we need to do just need to be unblocked, de-traumatized for Patty because she believes in trauma, and she's right. That there are social traumas, there are personal traumas, and they affect us, and then we go on as if this was normal. It's not.
Right.
Right. So
I was thinking as you said that, it is sort of a warning of using the buzzwords, is that we have really come to a place where oftentimes we're only listening until we hear something that we think then we can make a decision about. So often when you get to the point in your statement where you say public safety, people turn off their listening and say, oh, I know, like this person lands here, here, or here. And I think that's part of our, like, just our sort of combative place that we've come to as a community. And maybe that's, you know, a step of growth in our dehunkering of like remembering how to listen and have conversations.
there's Adrian Rich has this great phrase, the oppressor's language. Language is all around us all the time, and we filter out lots of stuff so that it is meme-like in how language is used. We have to reclaim the language because language is like the air we breathe. It oxygenates us. It's not just noise.
Builds the world.
And how we are spoken to and cared about is expressed in language. So this is such hopeful energy in these conversations because you know what else it means? We're not all crazy.
No.
Because there are other people like us
Yeah.
who care about the same things and are as passionate as we are. That's very calming, don't you think? Don't you feel less alone because you have these allies in this campaign that you teach and learn from and are sustained by? That's powerful medicine.
It is.
Powerful
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jerry. Well, and thank you, Jennifer, for
Thank
being
you
here.
so much.
I really
You said, yeah, I couldn't believe you were like, yeah, we've been talking over an hour and a half. Whoop.
I know. It's just friendly.
Yep,
so one of the
delightful.
things my friend Lorene, when she first visited my wife and I out on the coast, said it's so great to be somewhere you don't have to explain yourself or defend yourself. So when you get to have a conversation with people whose inherent sense of the human spirit and its sacredness and how far we are from protecting it, like, yeah, I just feel better because I could say bad words and make no sense at all, and I'm still part of the crew. And I think we found that in doing the first season of the podcast, is having conversations among people who love and trust each other is different.
I found for myself that I really seek value alignment with people, and the first thing that I try to seek value alignment around, and the most successful thing that I think we can all kind of team up around, is this concept of animacy, of recognizing that, like, we're all alive, and let's extend that livingness to all of the animals and all of the plants and the ecosystem itself as an organism, and how are all of these things living, and how are we living inside of that and are a part of that. And everything I'm reading about degrowth and trying to dismantle these systems of empire is you start with animacy. You start with reinserting yourself as part of nature. Like, you are nature, you are alive, and you are alive among other living things. And I think that's for me, like, basic value alignment. And that's where I want to start with people. Those are the conversations I want to have. And, like, I don't know if I had a moment of realization when I started running this campaign of, like, my constituents are not just people. My constituents are also all of the rats and all of the plants and all of the coyotes and all of, like, there's a bigger world than we frequently think of in our municipal boundaries, right? And so also just, like, bringing that into these conversations, that's part of what gives me hope and that what makes me feel welcome and safe at a table.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you guys for creating such a beautiful space to have these conversations. It's really awesome.
We're really glad to be able to do it.
Yeah.
These are truly two of my favorite people in the whole world. So I'm really happy that they're getting to meet more of the people in the world.
Yeah, of course. No, me too.
I feel like we're giving a gift to the city, and I'm super excited about that. And I hope it really is beneficial to people to get to spend, 2 hours with Jennifer Park and know what she's about and know what she would do in this city given the chance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these conversations have been going so well that we're going to do another set of 5.
We are.
So that's really
Yes.
exciting. We're getting that up and running in the works.
Yeah.
I
So.
promise to be on time.
Fine, Jerry.
What, you live here?
I know that should make it easy, right? No, my granddaughter is in town for a day and a half. We went to the Japanese garden and things didn't go exactly as we had planned, so we couldn't get
Universe
back.
time. You got to prioritize that. It's like your 13-year-old's birthday. That's way more important.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is, isn't it?
It is.
I'm not really a bad person.
Not at
Oh my
all.
gosh,
Okay.
Jerry.
No, Jerry,
Oh,
we love
no, I
you.
hope-
That was a line. I know that was
Good.
that's me when I'm being a trickster. That's me.
Yeah, you
My
tell me I'm a
trickster.
bad person sometimes. When I put you in your place.
I
and
let
you're like,
I let
"You're
you
a bad
get away
person."
with talking about technology without snorting, didn't I?
There were no snorts of derision. Correct. You held it together very well.
When I first met you, there were snorts of derision. There are
Yes.
no longer snorts of derision.
I know.
There are mild needs to say that some things cannot be done through technology.
That's fair.
I mean,
I can accept that.
And that
We just need to figure out
communication,
how.
one level of communication can be done through apps and so on, and it's important. But unless there's also the sort of touch.
You're right. You're right. I know. Oh my gosh. Don't keel over, Jerry.
Call 911.
No, those response times are too long. Just kidding. I'm sorry. That was dark. It was dark. All right. Well, is it snack break time?
Yep. Snacks. Break. We're done.
Yay.
Cheers.
That's a wrap.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Speaking Truth to Goodness. It's been incredibly insightful to hear from Jennifer Park, a steadfast advocate for systemic change within our city. Jennifer's commitment to shifting from temporary fixes to addressing the root causes of our community's challenges highlights a critical perspective needed in Portland's governance. Jennifer's background in nonprofit work and her transition to local government reflect a deep dedication to not only understanding, but actively improving the structures that affect our most vulnerable populations. Her approach to building community resilience and her strategies for personal sustainability serve as valuable lessons for all of us engaged in or affected by public service. We hope you found this conversation as enlightening and inspiring as we did. Please continue to engage with us by liking, commenting, sharing this episode, and following us on Instagram. Let's keep speaking truth to goodness, because goodness is all around.